Hey guys, I wanted to hop on here and speak a little bit about my rod removal process. When I posted the belly dancing video of me last week, I got a lot of questions as to why my rods were removed. So I wanted to just first off say that I had scoliosis surgery with a spinal fusion, my entire thoracic. And I then had an infection, actually 3 infections, and the rods removed 3 years later. Unfortunately, they weren't able to detect the infections, and they said this was because the types of infections that I have were all water-based. So the process for when you're getting tested for an infection is you get a culture test done either on the site of the abscess, or they inject dye through your veins and you watch on kind of a screen as the dye moves through your body. It's kind of freaky. But all of my tests came up negative, and I had an enormous amount of pain developing right between my shoulder blades, very isolated area, not the whole fusion. And a lump started to grow on my spine. It ended up being about the size of 2 golf balls next to each other is how I describe it. And I was on spring break in Florida with my friends. It was like sophomore year of college. And the abscess literally erupted out of my spine. And I spent the next 5 days in the hospital in Florida. So they weren't able to detect it because it was water-based. By the way, this is a very rare thing. I had my surgery done at UCSF. I'm from San Francisco, and by a world-renowned orthopedic pediatric surgeon, because I was 17. And I was the first patient he ever had to have the rods removed due to infection. So this is extremely rare. So I don't want to scare anybody. And that's why people who are asking, oh, I have pain, does this mean I have an infection? It's hard to say because my pain was very isolated and it was hard to detect with the culture test. But if you do have pain in a very isolated area like that, go see multiple doctors for opinions. And if you still feel skeptical, you can mention my story about how the culture test kept coming up negative, but there was a huge lump developing and they thought maybe it was muscular because the culture tests were negative, when it ended up actually being a giant abscess growing in my back. So you guys asked me a lot of questions. I wrote them down so that I can address all of them. What was your scale of usual pain before when you had the rods in compared to now without the rods? Well, the rods never gave me pain. It was the infection. So I would say that it's hard to answer that because, yeah, the rods never gave me pain. I really didn't even notice the rods were in compared to now when they're out. A lot of people don't know this, but the rods are actually completely unnecessary after the initial fusion, and most people just don't get another rod removal because that's a whole surgery, extra surgery that they have to do. But in some ways, if I'm being honest, I'm very glad that my rods are out. It's 5 pounds of metal in your body, and you know, it's a foreign object in your body. And I think depending on the severity, maybe some curvatures need to continue to have the rods in to support the fusion. In my case though, the rods came out and I've been absolutely fine. And so in some ways, I wish that was actually a follow-up procedure, because if you think about it, your body's probably much healthier and perhaps at less risk of getting an infection when you don't have a foreign object in your body. What complications did the rods have on you? Yeah, I didn't have any complications with the rods specifically. It was the infection, but I guess the way that it was explained to me is that bacteria can seep in at any part of your body. So like I could have gotten a cut on my toe and bacteria seeped in and they're attracted to foreign objects in the body. So maybe it made its way up to my spine. And they said when they took the rods out, the whole rod was just infected. It's kind of like mucus, basically. Like, you know, when you have a cold and you're blowing your nose, it's kind of like the rods were covered in that. Because I actually had a hole in my back draining for 4 months prior to the surgery, because that's sometimes what they do to help get the infection out. It didn't work for me. They needed to take the rods out, but it pretty much just looks like green mucus. What complications do you have now without the rods? 0. I'm very happy the rods are out. Even though they had to come out, I'm very happy they're out. And I imagine that I did gain some mobility, but I will be honest and say I really don't notice much of a difference between when the rods were in and when the rods were out. What was the recovery time from your first surgery after they inserted the rods? Oof, everyone who's gone through that knows that that is a horrible recovery. So it's like a 9-hour procedure, and then it was about a 6-week recovery. And it is rough, especially, when you're withdrawing from the drugs from the hospital, and you're trying to get the nausea medication under control so you can keep your pills down, and then gradually getting off, the pain medication. It's a process, and kind of relearning how to walk and everything. So the recovery time, 6 weeks. And then 6 months later, I was dancing. I was fine. I was honestly really fine after a few months. No pain. I felt great. I was kind of like their star people because I had such a good recovery. I thought I was home free. Of course, then I have this disastrous infection ordeal years later. But after that initial 6-week recovery, which is terrible, it's kind of like it's all a dream, unless you have follow-up infections. Let's see, what activities did having rods limit you from? Well, I'm a ballet dancer, or just all types of dance. So back bends, kind of, and arabesques, that's when you lift your back leg up, definitely were hard and are limited to me now, even. And then I would notice it in yoga sometimes, but I have some other complications with being hypermobile in my joints, and having like a long neck. I've posted a little bit about it, having a long neck and a reverse curve in my neck. So some of my biomechanics have contributed to me struggling with some things after all, but that's not specific, actually has nothing to do with the scoliosis. It's probably just the perfect storm of everything. But definitely bending back, lifting my back leg up. Other like normal person activities, if you're not a dancer, I really didn't notice anything. Sometimes, there's like that couch, if you know what I'm talking about. Like there's that couch or that chair at your friend's that's like tilted back, and you're kind of like awkwardly like, because your spine doesn't bend, so it's more comfortable just to kind of sit forward. So I've noticed that, and sometimes there'll be really uncomfortable chairs like at conferences, those metal ones or something. So sitting for a long time, or one that kind of tilts back and you have to kind of compensate. It's the only thing I can really think of. Let's see, what activities has the removal of rod surgery limited? None. It has opened me up to everything, but I'm still limited because my spine's still fused. So same issues that I had when the rods were in. The benefits, I'd say, well, no risk of more infection, hopefully. And also, I probably gained some mobility back, I imagine. Which I'm actually going to do an entire, so I got so many questions about what exercises I do for mobility. I'm going to do a whole other video on the types of things that I work on to help the mobility, and they've worked a lot and they've made a huge difference. And it's not just dance, or it's things like receiving cupping to break up the scar tissue has made a huge difference, rolling on a foam roller. So I'll go over that in another video because I got a lot of questions about that. How much did the rod removal cost? I don't know. My parents paid because I was young. So, you know, when you're young, you don't really get numbers run by you. I imagine my insurance covered it. I know it was not cheap. And how long was the removal surgery? It was about 4 hours to take the rods out. What kind of infection was it? Okay. And what else other infections am I at risk of? I don't know what other infections, because I didn't even know my back could get infected. And I really didn't do much research into it once the rods were out. The infections that I got, I only remember 2 of the 3. One was P. acnes, which actually is the type of bacteria that causes acne on your back. The other one was staph epi, so staph infection. Did they remove the whole rod from last time and replace it with the new one, or just for the thoracic area? Yeah, they took it all out. They gave it in a little biohazard bag. I have it in my closet. It's heavy, all the bolts and screws and rods, and it's hard to imagine that that's, you know, in your body. And yeah, they don't replace it. They don't need to, which is great. Again, like I almost kind of wish that was a follow-up surgery, that they would just remove the rods if you qualify for that. How did you regain back flexibility at the lumbar portion, since the bones are supposed to be fused, I thought? I just got my thoracic fused. I had an S-curve, so I had 52 degrees at the top and 38 on the bottom. I think I got it fused from T3 to L1. And so, and now I have 0% curvature. They fixed it completely. If you fuse the thoracic, the lumbar actually doesn't need to be fused, at least in my case. I know there's, you know, a lot of people have different cases, but for me, I didn't need the lumbar fused, and it straightened out on its own because the thoracic got straightened out. So yeah, that 38% curvature corrected itself. I don't quite know how that works, but yeah, my lumbar was not fused at all except for L1. So I still always had the flexibility there. Let's see. What does it feel like? Oh yeah, not the rods and compared to when the rods were in. So there's really not much of a difference. So if you're looking into getting your rods removed just because you want them out, I will honestly say, like, it doesn't feel much different. If you are experiencing severe pain, talk to your doctor, surgeon, get as many opinions as possible about what could be going on. And I mean, it took me a 1.5 years of severe chronic pain between my shoulder blades for them to, and then they never figured out until an abscess erupted. So, you know, doctors are humans too, and sometimes they don't pick up on things. So that's why it's important. Pain is your body's way of saying something's not right. I even remember my surgeon saying to me, pain's in your mind. And I was like, that's not fair. So tell that to the abscess growing in my back that exploded. So anyway, yeah, don't ever let a surgeon or doctor tell you that pain's in your mind. Pain is your body's way of saying that there's something not right. And definitely to get multiple opinions.